For committee stage next sitting day. Call on Government Order of the Day number 3.
Commerce Amendment Bill interrupted debate on first reading.
So when we were last debating this bill, Brett Hudson was speaking and he has 5 minutes remaining.
Madam Speaker.
Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise again and continue this contribution. Now, when we last left off, I was talking about the concerns we had about the proposed market studies power, particularly the self-initiation provisions for the Commerce Commission, where their structure, where the effective decision-making, where normally in a business or other Crown entity we might think of as the decisions of the executive, are made in practice in the Commission by the same group of people who fulfil the governance-type role that we might see in other entities as a board. So with self-initiation, Madam Speaker, there simply is not the sort of check and balance that would exist in a business or entity structure that had a separation of the executive and an independent board. And we think that's really quite important in this environment, because the market studies provisions, while they are unquestionably a good idea to help ensure competitiveness in our markets and protection, particularly for our consumers, they are very, very powerful powers that they confer, and they have the very real ability to be very, quite frankly, burdensome and expensive, and to place a great deal of pressure on businesses across any number of industries. We feel it is appropriate, given the power that is vested in the Commission, that there should be some check or balance to the exercise of that market studies power. Now, in the absence of having an independent board, that would best vest with the responsible minister and cabinet. That was in the original provisions that the previous government had agreed to. They were going to be ministerial initiated inquiries. They could have been made at the request of the Commerce Commission, of the commissioners, but initiated by the minister. And indeed, even if semantically there were to be provisions about self-initiation, they should have that check and balance of being approved by the minister, which means, of course, with Cabinet's endorsement also. And we feel quite strongly about this, Madam Speaker. We cannot support the bill with the provisions as they are. It's a very deliberate change by Minister Farfoy. I've seen the Cabinet paper he took. He was aware of the conditions or the state of the bill under the previous government, and he made a very deliberate move to change that. We do not support that. The other element of the bill is around additional regulation-making provisions for the regulation of airports. Ordinarily, you could look at this, or one could look at this, Madam Speaker, and suggest that in the hypothetical that the officials have given, you could build a case for saying, well, if a problem were to arise, this would enable it to be addressed somewhat easier and more rapidly. But I think it's incorrect to presume, as officials have done, that it wasn't the intention of Parliament for it to be the way it is. And that is that should it be determined that the information disclosure regime were not sufficient, then it would have to be through a legislative change that additional powers or regulation making authority were granted to the Commission. I don't think there is any clear evidence to suggest, as some officials have, that it was a drafting error that led it to be the way it was. But even more importantly, Madam Speaker, is that in the regulatory impact statements, the officials note a couple of very key points. The first point they note is that there is evidence that the current regime of information disclosure is working well. So they're saying that there is no problem that exists with the current regulation. And the second point they make is about the wider stakeholders, which includes customers, purchasers, consumers, and that is that the impact, should there be a problem, would not be significant. They make the point that the competitiveness between airlines has a far greater impact on pricing consumers pay than landing fees, airport charges. So quite frankly, the officials have put out there supporting evidence that suggests that their request or their recommendation is not warranted. And our view is that regulation and regulation-making powers should be appropriate and only there to the extent that they are needed, They should address a very specific and real problem. That problem should be reinforced with evidence, and the officials' own arguments do not actually support doing that. And so we cannot, in this instance, support that the additional regulation-making authority. Madam Speaker, the lyricist once said 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but 1 out of 3 is poor, and we do not support this bill.
I call Michael Wood.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to take a call on the Commerce Amendment Bill.